Welcome to the Constructed Awareness Podcast. In this episode, Tyler Orr and Christina Casavalos talk about chronic pain and how to treat it with CA. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Constructed Awareness Podcast. This is our second episode where we talk about things related to constructed awareness, or CA for short. I'm Tyler Orr. I'm the creator and developer of CA, and I have on with me today Christina Casavalos. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Cool.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about you and what you do?
Yes. Again, my name is Christina Casavalos. I am a psychotherapist. California-based, but also international. I consider myself to be a holistic and integrative psychotherapist, very much mind, body, spirit, specializing in chronic illness, chronic pain, and complex trauma.
Great. That's great. You kind of live all over, right?
Yes,
all over the
a
world,
little bit.
Just moving around. Yeah.
A little bit.
Are you in the States now?
I am. I'm currently in California, but mostly in Europe these days.
Awesome. Well, I'm in Tennessee, right? So we're on the opposite ends of the coast. But we're going to talk about pain, right? Constructed awareness, because we both work with chronic pain, and how do we do it? And I think this is a cool topic. A little personal background, and you can share yours. I'm sure it's a similar sort of thing, but I've had issues with chronic pain my whole life. My grandmother died of complications of rheumatoid arthritis. So this is a personal topic for me. And I remember I went to my very first training I ever attended, like my first continuing education training. It was a hypnosis training when I was still in grad school. And there was a little 20-minute module, or whatever you want to call it, lecture portion at the end of the training about chronic pain. It blew my mind. You know, I didn't know we could work with that. I thought that was what body workers did, like chiropractors or doctors or massage therapists or whatever, not us mental health professionals. And that really stuck with me and became something that I started to explore. And it's really all I worked with for a couple of years. I would say it was kind of my niche. And that is yours, right? Is this kind of all you work with? Cool. Well, once I started constructed awareness, I kind of opened my practice up to lots of things just to get some experience using CA with things other than chronic pain. Well, what's your experience with pain? Like, what led you to this work not with pain, but also what led you to CA?
So for as far as like pain and chronic illness are concerned, I also dealt with pain most of my life, like pretty severe pain. I ended up getting surgeries. I saw all the chiropractors. I went to physical therapy. I was having steroids injected into my back for some time, and PRP. I mean, the list goes on and on with all of the things I tried, because no one had ever told me about really the mind-body connection. That was not taught to me in grad school, nor was trauma or epigenetics or anything like this in nature. And we're going to get into this. But Dr. John Sarno, his book, I forget who had recommended it to me. This was so many years ago. I remember reading the Mind Body Prescription and You Can Heal Your Back Pain. And by the end of it, I kid you not, I was a person who was operating between like a 7 or 8 level of pain on a lot of days. I had an 80% decrease in my pain by the end of the book.
So you're one of those people.
I'm one of those people that I was able to intellectually understand. The connection. And that's truly like, okay, let's dig into this. And then with chronic illness, I was couch bound. I was so sick. And again, like no one had really taught me about how trauma can be playing a part in my nervous system, dysfunction basically. And what I could do to heal that and to decrease my symptoms and to help with my immune system function and my autonomic nervous system function and everything else going on in my body. So when I started doing more neural retraining work, that helped so much. And then the trauma work as well, and understanding the root of my dis-ease. As far as like EMDR is concerned, I didn't know about very many trauma-informed modalities at that when I first got trained in EMDR. There really aren't that many, actually, if you think about it, to begin with. So I think EMDR is definitely the most popular. So I had done that.
They all claim to be.
Sure. But like, for example, you can't think you're like CBT, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy. You can't think your way out of trauma. And that's what it's having you do. You have to feel it to heal it. And you need it to be sensational within the body. You need to feel what's coming up and what's going on and get curious about it. And that brings us to constructed awareness. But with EMDR, at least I had some kind of modality to use. And also I witnessed its limitations. I also saw that if you weren't properly resourced, and I had been a victim myself of this, it can actually trigger such a stress response that can also trigger a flare-up. And I was couch-bound for weeks after my first EMDR session because I didn't know about being resourced. I didn't know about my nervous system needing to be flexible and to have the square footage, if you will, to hold what was coming up and be with what was coming up. Anyway, that led me to find your training on EMDR and chronic illness. And that was awesome because it gave me more questions to ask around it, more curiosity. I mean, as we discussed earlier, like constructed awareness was at the very beginning and played a part in informing that training that you did. But that led me then to constructed awareness. And I'm so grateful because it's opened up an entirely new world for me and my clients. And I scream it. I mean, I've been on various podcasts being like, everyone needs to get trained in this. And of course, my clients all love it because it's this modality that allows you to return safely back into your body. And we also talked about this earlier, that it's scary to have chronic illness or chronic pain. Like often we are disembodied. We are living outside of our body because being inside of here feels horrible. It's really scary. And when doctors aren't helping us, and that's leading to more medical trauma, a whole other subject, but
yeah, for sure. We can talk about that later. But
yeah. But anyway, I mean, I always say healing is just a journey of returning back to yourself. And this is an amazing tool that allows for someone to slowly but like confidently do that.
Well, great. That's great. I didn't know you were a Sarno reader. I said, are you one of those people? Because like we'll talk about Sarno later, but he wrote several books on low back pain, and there's stories of people who like read his book and their pain went away. I've met one other person. It was a husband and wife who the wife came to see me. The husband just sat in the lobby as a support person. Unfortunately, they both had back pain, and he read the book and his back pain stopped. She read the book, hers didn't. But yeah, so that's cool. You're the second person I've met who had that. But I've heard stories of like thousands of people who, because it's a different paradigm of pain, and we're going to talk about that today. Before we talk about what pain is, would it be okay if I just introduced CAA? Because some people maybe listen to this and not sure what we mean by that.
So important. But I do want to interrupt you and let you know that I was at a conference this past weekend, and I was pain, as usual, was brought up in conversation. And the man I was speaking to or with, he's a coach in the field, but he shared that after reading Sarno's book, he also was able to kind of live a pain-free life and basically doesn't feel anything now. Like his went away almost entirely. Yeah. Yeah. So it is possible.
And we'll explain why that happens here in just a little bit. But so constructed awareness is a form of psychotherapy that, the easiest way that I've found to describe it is to talk about its three principles. So the first principle is if you bring awareness to something, it changes it. So with CA, we don't put energy into trying to change the client's experience. We put our energy into helping the client deepen their awareness of their experience. So a simple example, like little kids behave differently when they're being watched versus when they're not. It's like that awareness itself has the power to bring about change. So that's what we lean on with CA. So different than like your traditional therapies, like you mentioned, like CBT, which is really, really built around like willpower. And I hate to say it, but I think a lot of it's just like teaching clients to repress their experience in new ways. It's therapeutic repression, in my opinion, rather than like actually teaching the client how to connect with and relate differently to their experience. So that's what we try to do. We try to deepen the awareness and trust that the awareness itself will begin to bring about like an organic, natural change. Second principle that explains what we're bringing awareness to. So the second principle says that everything you've ever experienced is only made of three things. We call these the three building blocks. So the building blocks are your thoughts, that's your mental building block, your internal like sensations you feel in your body, that's your sensation building block, and your external senses, that's your external building block. So all of reality is constructed by those, but especially emotions. And I'm saying that in particular because we're going to talk about emotions' role and what the research shows, that the emotions' role in with chronic pain. And so CA brings a unique perspective to emotions because we believe emotions are constructed by these three building blocks, right? So a simple example is if you're afraid of snakes, I'm sorry, but I'll just use this as an example. But let's say you see a picture on TV of a snake. Well, there's the external trigger. What does it trigger? Your thoughts and your sensations, right? And let's say you have tension that builds in your body. You feel like a recoiling sensation, and you have negative thoughts about the snake. Well, as the external and the sensations and thoughts comes together, that creates what we would label as fear, right? So we'll come back to that because I think that's important to this conversation. So just put a pin in that for now. But the third principle is that most people are naturally more oriented, meaning they rely more on one building block more than the others in certain situations. So I spend most of my time in my mind. I'm mentally oriented. I regulate myself through my thoughts, and I like to connect more intellectually, right? My wife is sensation oriented. She's a great example of that. She's like a body moving through the world. So it's like if she gets upset, she regulates herself through movement or through cathartic expression, so it's much different, very different experiences if you watched her and I kind of navigate. And I think you're more externally oriented. Would you agree with that? So
sure am. So you'll see me organizing a room when I'm feeling upregulated or dysregulated.
Right. Yeah. So you organize you regulate your space to regulate yourself. Probably regulate other people to regulate yourself too. It's like if people around you are okay, then you're okay.
I didn't know that. Yes, for sure. For sure. I never thought of that as part of the external orientation. Mm-hmm. Wow. As usual.
There you go. So, and orientation, it changes. Not every, no one is like one type. That's kind of a new thing, actually, from when you were trained. We've moved away from talking about types. Like we used to kind of like try to type people with this. There's a typology with constructed awareness. But now it's orientation styles because the new theory, the way that we're conceptualizing orientation is the building blocks are always rearranging in different situations. So I might be mentally oriented, but I'm not all the time. I just am most of the time. Just like you're not always externally oriented. But I bet you are a good bit of the time, right? So those are the three principles. Is that bringing up anything for you? Just curious.
No, I think this is just a really beautiful mind, body, spirit modality because it's using all of the different orientation types. We're not hyper-focused on just one and staying there. And earlier we talked about like changing the channels, tuning, and how important that is. Like if someone is experiencing something that's challenging, I can literally just reorient them to something outside of themselves or within themselves, depending on what's going on. And we can go back to that thing. We're not avoiding it, so to speak. We're just bringing awareness to something else. And then it lightens it when we come back. So, I mean, it's just incredible.
It's not just a mind-body connection. It's like a mind-body environment connection. So I think it's even like more holistic than to just say that it's a mind-body thing. But it's like pulling in all three parts and understanding that like an emotion is a combination of those three things. It's like, and I ask people all the time, like, what do you feel in your body? And they'll answer with an emotion word. And I think like a lot of times we'll label feelings that way. And it really like limits the experience. But like you don't actually feel an emotion in your body. That's something I always say. It's like an emotion is like an umbrella term that describes the collection of those three parts. So it's like going to the doctor and with a sprained wrist, and the doctor says, what do you feel? It wouldn't make sense to say, well, I feel angry here and sad here and anxious here. Like, those words don't actually describe sensations. So that's a big part of what we do with CA. It's like we help people actually, like, develop a vocabulary for sensation and thoughts and external, but also like how to move into those realms of experience more deeply. Because, like, for me, for example, I'm mentally oriented, so it's like my mental building blocks way overdeveloped and my external sensation are way down here, less developed. What we're attempting to do is like bring awareness to those parts that are less developed so that there's more balance. But it would be opposite for you, right? Because you're more external. So we would focus more on the mental and the sensation to bring awareness, to bring balance to your system. Yep.
Yeah.
Would it be okay if we shifted gears a little bit and started and talked about pain?
Yes. Let's get into it.
I'm learning as a young researcher that when you're integrating two ideas, you write one idea, then you write about the second idea, then you pull them all together in the next part. So we've talked about CA, let's talk about pain, and then we'll talk about how we integrate them. Sound good? Okay. I'm curious to see like how my conceptualization of pain aligns with yours. So feel free to jump in, and we'll just kind of see. But I always start with René Descartes. You've heard of him. He's the guy that said, I think, therefore I am. He's the philosopher. He was a pretty brilliant guy. It was, I guess they call it like a Renaissance man maybe, but he was a philosopher. He was a scientist. He was you name it. He kind of just did it. But this was like back in the day when it was like the first time in history where people could dissect cadavers. And it wasn't like against the law or like a sin or what they would burn you at the stake for doing science. So he and his colleagues, they were dissecting bodies, and they noticed these white strands that ran all through the body. We know them as nerves. He called them pain tubes. You ever heard that? Right. So he was able to identify, okay, these are these have something to do with pain. We call them pain tubes. And there's this drawing that he made. It's this little naked man, and he's got his foot in a fire. And according to the Cartesian, so René Descartes, Cartesians, that's what they call it, the Cartesian model of pain, in this example, the guy's foot is burning in the fire. So pain happens in the foot, and the pain signal goes up the pain tube into the brain, where the brain recognizes that there's pain in the foot, causing the person to move their foot out of the fire. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that's how we think about pain. And for the last 400 or so years, all of our pain treatment has been based on the Cartesian model of pain. That pain happens in the tissue of the body. You're probably sensing some foreshadowing that I'm about to say that's not true, right? So modern current pain neuroscience teaches us that pain doesn't actually happen in the body. It happens in the brain, right? And the Cartesian model is inaccurate. What actually happens is, okay, the guy's got his foot in the fire. There's sensors in his foot that detect what's happening in the foot and on the outside of the foot. And so in this instance, there is damage that's happening to his foot. So the sensors in his foot detect that potential damage. So it sends a signal up the nerve, but it's not a pain signal because no pain is happening at this point. It's an alarm signal, like a danger signal. It goes up into the brain, and the brain processes that signal and determines yes or no, like is there damage or no damage. So in this case, there is damage. So luckily, this guy's brain says, yes, there is damage. So what it does to protect the person is it projects the experience of pain, but it doesn't send the pain signal down the nerve into the foot. There actually is no downflow for pain. What happens is the brain projects the experience of pain into the person's consciousness. Now, this is really important. It took me a long time to understand this. I did workshops with a doctor and a PT. We traveled around, did workshops on chronic pain, and for months before this actually clicked for me. Like, oh, like pain doesn't happen in the body. Like, there is actually nothing in your body that's capable of creating pain. It's just like your eyes. You don't actually see in your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in your eyes that creates vision. There's only like light receptors. And those receptors send data to the brain, and the brain projects the experience of vision into your consciousness. It just happens to do it right where your eyes are. But see, this is why we have things like phantom limb pain. Because there's pain occurring in a part of the body that's no longer there. Because the person's brain is projecting the pain into their consciousness where that part of the body used to be. Right? So if Rene Descartes was right and we experience pain in the tissue of our body, that's negated by phantom limb pain.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no tissue there at all. So is this aligned with like your understanding of it?
100%.
100%.
100%.
And that's what Sarno talked about, right? And his protege, Howard Schubner, and now Alan Gordon. Some of the people that, I think is like you mentioned, like these are people that you should read. If you have chronic pain or you're a therapist interested in working with chronic pain, these are must reads. But that's what they basically talk about. Like pain doesn't occur in the body. It occurs in the brain, and it's a projection. It's projected into your awareness, your reality. So like I was saying before, it's like, man, could somebody like me, like a lowly mental health professional, work with chronic pain? Yeah, because it's actually not occurring in the body, right? And a lot of times, there's a difference between acute pain and chronic pain. If I injure myself, that's acute pain. It's hurting. It's supposed to, right? But as it heals, what happens if it persists? It's like the brain turns on that switch to project pain, but sometimes it doesn't turn the switch off.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where like people like us come in, because people don't, you wouldn't sprain your wrist and say, well, let me call my counselor. We're at the bottom of the list, right? And so usually folks come to us because they've tried everything. And you probably have stories too about people who have tried. You've tried all kinds of stuff, right?
Took me a while. Took me so many, decades.
Yeah. So a counselor or a mental health professional was not anywhere near the top of the list.
I didn't even know. I didn't know about the mind, body, spirit connection then. So, nor was I taught about it in grad school. So,
yeah. Was it Sarno's book? Was that the first time?
Sarno was that was the book. That was like the most, okay, I get this. And just piggyback, mentioning this, like we've evolved to physically feel pain over emotionally feeling pain. I don't know if you're going to get into that, but like when it comes to those trapped emotions, and I believe I don't know if it was him or Alan Gordon who mentioned like they looked at cadavers who had horrible backs, like their spines were not doing well, not doing too hot, right? Like things were just either damaged or not in the right place. And these people never complained about physical pain. And then on the opposite end of that, someone who had extreme chronic pain their entire life, they couldn't find anything structurally wrong with the person. So why does this happen?
Yeah, it makes me think there was a study. It's an older study now. I talked about it in that presentation that you saw, but I can't imagine what the funding was for this, but the researchers did MRIs on 3,000 people who had no back pain. They were asymptomatic. They just wanted to see what was going on, and they found that, like, I'll round down my age and say 40. So, like, people my age, they found that, like, 50% of them had, like, disc degeneration, bulged disc. It's like all the stuff that's supposed to cause back pain, they all had, but they had no back pain. Right? So those are good examples of, like, times where there's tissue pathology, but there's no pain. And there's also examples of, like, no tissue damage and pain. There's, like, the story that Anybody that works in pain has heard about the construction worker that fell off the scaffolding, and it's like a nail went through his boot, and he was in agony, just excruciating pain. They took him to the ER and did an X-ray and found that the nail had went between his toes, like there wasn't a scratch on him. And as soon as he realized that, that's like the pain stopped. And so that's an example. It's like the brain determines whether or not pain is useful or not, right? It's just like, it's like, imagine, you hear stories about soldiers that are injured and, injured horribly, and they continue to fight. And a lot of times you hear them say, well, I didn't feel any pain. And people think it's because of the adrenaline. Actually, adrenaline increases pain. But what's happening is that soldier's brain recognizes, okay, like pain is not the most useful thing right now. No pain is more useful to survive this experience, right? And so it's all about what the brain decides to do and not do, and that's an involuntary response. So I think when we're talking about like chronic pain, it's like the brain turned on the switch for pain and didn't turn it off for whatever reason. And we could talk about what those reasons are. I think there's several reasons that we could get into. But I think all that's really important to set up the conversation, to realize, pain is in the brain. It's a projection that's showing up in your consciousness. And I'm kind of repeating it because I think I needed to hear it over and over again in my life too before it clicked. And it's interesting, like the somatic therapists, they're like, so what do you feel in your body? It's like, technically nothing. Like you never have. You're experiencing it in your consciousness, which is wild. Everything is a projection. Everything we experience is a projection of the brain.
Yeah. And we mentioned this earlier, like doctors will so often say it's in your head. And the irony is like they're not wrong, because it's technically in your brain, but it's not separated from your body. So it's really combining all of those things to heal, to understand how and why it came about in the first place. And if you're listening and you are going through, you do have chronic pain, we're not here telling you your pain is not real. It's very real. Way. You are experiencing it, but there's mechanisms as to why, which is a wonderful thing, because that means you can also heal and be free from it, essentially. Yeah. Reduce your symptoms.
Yeah, and I think it's like we were saying, it's like, counselors, mental health professionals at the bottom of the list of people to try. Well, it's like what we're talking about here is, for me, it brought hope, because like, oh, this is a whole different like avenue, a whole new thing to explore. Like, what if my body's actually okay?
What if my body is actually healthy? What if there's a I think a poem called that, and it's very powerful. Cool. And and I've had clients come to me now, and for migraines, and then we do some work together, and I've gotten texts an hour later or the next day, like, it's gone, and so this works on so many different levels.
It does. I've honestly had just as much success with chronic pain than I have anything. I've had more success with chronic pain than depression, if I'm being honest, as me personally as a therapist. But it's just been the wildest thing to have people that have been to like, Vanderbilt, Mayo Clinic, these big institutions, and no relief, and they come to my little private practice office and they start feeling better. And it's like, well, that's because like the issue wasn't in the tissue to begin with, right? It's, so a lot of times when we're talking about chronic pain, this is what we're talking about. And a lot of times it's the result of just an overwhelmed nervous system. There's tons of research that links it to repressed emotions, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And that's great, because that totally plants that in the realm of what mental health professionals do.
Totally.
Right? We don't work with the body, but the pain's not there to begin with. Right?
Yeah. Somatization disorder is one of those big ones, I think, and constructed awareness works wonders for it, because where is this coming up in the body? Why is it coming up in the body? Like, just getting curious about, again, that root of dis-ease of what we haven't been able to feel safe enough to heal. And to feel safe enough, we need to get the nervous system in a safe enough position. And that can happen via co-regulation, especially with the therapist, especially with the
I
therapist.
just published a paper in the Journal of Humanistic Counseling. It was a conceptual paper on like the CA and the theory of constructed emotion, how like the emotions, like we talked about the 3 building blocks. But I did a case example. It was a real case example, but it was a client who had complex PTSD and somatic symptom disorder. And I think it was like 12 sessions. At the end of it, she didn't meet diagnosis for either. Like
Wow.
she didn't meet the criteria for those. And the first paper that was published on CA was a comparison paper of EMDR and CA, and we did like a small randomized controlled trial. It was 30 participants. But we measured trauma symptoms, but we also measured central sensitization symptoms, which is another way of saying like chronic pain symptoms. And there was significant decrease in all of those symptoms too, not just the trauma. So I don't know if you knew that, but like almost all of the CA research, or at least half of the CA research so far has had a focus on chronic pain and illness with it.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, I think that's what led me to you, because so some of the research had already been published by that point that I saw, and then like, yeah, this sounds fantastic, because EMDR for me was limited in certain ways. I still use it from time to time, depending, but CA has taken me much further than any modality has thus far. And
Why do you think that is?
I think really truly because it gives you that clients the pathway to return back into their body and to feel safe enough to feel it, to heal it, and being able to tune in and out of the different orientations is huge. And to just be with what they have experienced and the pain of that on an emotional level, and then seeing how that affects the rest of their body when they're with it and they express it, and it's not just trapped in their bodies. You know, when we know about the body keeps the score. I mean, all of it.
Cameron, have I talked about tuning yet? I don't think so. You mentioned that. I think that's something we got to talk about. But like tuning is a technique in constructed awareness where you shift awareness between the 3 building blocks. So it's like you bring awareness to each of the, you help the client learn to bring awareness to each building block separately, but then you begin to practice shifting. And that's what you were saying earlier, like changing the channel. It's like, let's notice the mind, connect with that. Okay, what are you feeling in your body? Connect with that. And then what are you noticing outside of you? And it's just that ability to shift between the 3. It's like different ways of, talking about the word to tune, but it's like tuning an instrument. You can't know if an instrument is in tune with itself by listening to one string. So it's like if I go along my whole life plucking my mental string, and you go your whole life plucking your external string, we're never going to know if our systems are in tune with the other strings or the other parts. It's when you play one string and then you play another, that's what tells you if it's in tune. So it's like, it's like checking in with the other parts of myself helps me understand like what I need more of, and like what I'm lacking and how to grow. Or also it's like the old way of like tuning into like a radio station. It's like you move through till you hear something. You move the dial and then you hear something else. So it's kind of what we do. It's like a lot of somatic therapists, they track sensation in the body. And you'll hear that a lot in like pain work. Alan Gordon talks a lot about like somatic tracking. I think we're going even further because we're not just tracking the body, we're tracking the whole experience. We're tracking the body, but we're also tracking like what's going on in the mind, what's going on around you in the external environment, and how do those interact with each other to create now, like this moment, and your experience of life, right now.
Something else I want to mention is like, let's just use chronic pain as an example. So often we don't realize we're stuck in a rut. We're stuck on that one radio station and we hyper-identify with it. We are that radio station. That's us. There's nothing else on the radio. And this allows the client to tune in to something else, simultaneously othering the pain in this case and realizing it's also part of their brilliant, because we're just brilliant mosaic pieces. I always say that. Like we're not banning it. We're not shaming it. We're just letting it be. We're just being curious and letting it shift and do whatever it wants. That's why I have so much fun and joy and play with it, because It's just, we're just there with it. And when we bring that, and you mentioned this in the very beginning, when we bring that attention to it, I mean, it's bound to shift. It's bound to change. We don't know how or when or what, but in every experience it has with the client.
Yeah, we don't know how it's going to change, but it tends to change when you bring awareness to it, and especially with like that play. I love that playful vibe you just talked about. You know, I didn't say it. It's not my, but I heard someone say at some point, you know, the fear and curiosity can't coexist, and it's like if we're being curious and playful with the part of our experience that has been like either off limits or like dangerous or scary to us, it really begins to shift things, because pain is a protective response. What if we were able to move into that thing that we were afraid of in a different way? Well, there's really a need for protection anymore, right? If we're curious about it and we're approaching it in a playful, open sort of way. It's like the nervous system has to begin to shift how it protects us, right? You know, I don't know if I ever told you this, but like, I don't know if this feels like jumping, but I had chronic neck pain. I saw a chiropractor like 3 times a week. I would constantly like go from like ice to heat. I worked at a halfway house. I was in grad school at the time. And I just reached a point one night. I was sitting there with the ice on my neck, and I got so frustrated with hurting that I called my wife and I said, I give up. I'm done. She's like, what do you mean? I was like, I feel like it's so hard trying to feel good. I think it would just be easier to feel bad. So I was like, I'm done trying to feel better. And I threw away my ice packs. I gave away the heating pad to a guy at the house. I stopped going to the chiropractor. And what's funny is I started feeling better. I just accepted, okay, I'm hurting. I was like, this is easier than trying to not hurt, right? And just like healing from healing, yeah. And just began to welcome that sensation and experience it differently. And this was way before CA, but I think that was influential in real, like that curiosity piece, that awareness. Because I just would sit and just experience it and just, you know, try to understand it, try to learn from it, try to experience something about it that I'd never experienced before. And it's interesting, that's when I started feeling better, is when I stopped trying to feel better. So is that bringing up anything for you?
Yeah, I mean, so often that hypervigilance of like looking for what is causing us pain or what we can do to remedy it actually puts us further into a fight or flight response. It's its own trauma response. So when we're surrendering to the pain and letting it just be what it is, there's so much, I feel like, empowerment and freedom in choosing that and to let it be, because we live in a society that makes a lot of money on these pain remedies, if you think about it, right? And so often when my clients just let things be as they are, I'm not telling anyone to do this. I'm just saying there have been occasions where my clients are like, I'm done taking my medications, like supplements and so forth, and doing all of these things. Like, I just want a break. And ironically, that is when they actually see the biggest decrease in symptoms.
You've probably had clients, it's like they limit themselves. It's like they have 2 things they can eat. They can only sit a certain way, but they still feel bad. So it's like if the issue was actually in the body, those things probably would have fixed it by now. And I guess that's what I realized. Like, I've limited my life so much, but I feel just as bad. I felt just as bad before when I was like living it up, and I wasn't living in all these limited ways. So that's when I kind of just began to like move into the life that I wanted to live. And it's like my nervous system kind of caught up.
Well, it's like Dr. Ben Hardy's be, do, have, right? Like, I'm going to just move into these things that I always say joy is the antithesis of dis-ease. So like just becoming the person you'd want to be if chronic illness and chronic pain did not exist, like who would you be? And you will naturally take steps towards that. It's really interesting. Yeah.
It's kind of like ACT, right? Acceptance commitment
Yep.
therapy. It's like you
Yep.
decide what your values are and you accept that it's going to be hard and you pursue that
Yeah.
anyway. There's
But
a
what's
bit
harder?
of over. Yeah.
What's harder though? Staying in pain? Like I always say, people will choose the familiar hell over unfamiliar heaven. And that includes staying in like a toxic relationship or toxic job or continuing with this pain. It's like, no, there is, if you're listening to this, there is another option. There is another option. You don't have to be in a chronic survival response.
Right. And that's where therapy comes in. You know, it's helping clients learn, we're teaching their nervous system to be more regulated. That's kind of the basis of CA. But there's like a small mountain of evidence that says that links chronic pain, not acute pain, that's not what we're talking about, but chronic pain to repressed emotions. And Sarno, we've mentioned him, John Sarno, the doctor that treated Howard Stern, and his back pain went away, and that's how he kind of became famous because he was talking about him on the air. But he said that chronic pain is the result of repressed rage. He was very Freudian in that language and kind of fit with that. But his people who've come after him, like Howard Schubner, Alan Gordon, they talk more about like it's more like repressed emotion. And I said earlier about let's put a pin on how CA talks about emotion. Because think about if the problem is repressed emotion, CA is a good antidote for that because we're bringing awareness to emotions that are unconscious. But we conceptualize emotions as the combination of those three building blocks, your thoughts, sensations, and external. So I don't know if it's what you found, but even just like in like resourcing with CA, that helping people bring awareness to those parts, especially the parts that they're cut off from.
Mm-hmm.
Like the symptoms begin to change just through that. So I guess it's not like Schubner wanted you to get angry, like express anger. But I think the work that we do, it's not so much like connecting with the expression, it's connecting with the experience of like, okay, what are you feeling in your body? Like what are the thoughts that are coming to mind? Like what's happening around you, and like learning to connect with those differently and change the relationship. Is that aligned with how you use it?
Definitely. And I intertwine like internal family systems into it because it's like what part of you is thinking this or experiencing this, and et cetera, et cetera. And I do a lot of inner child work with constructed awareness because we are going back into the past. I call it like timeline hopping or jumping. And, you know, for those listening who aren't, I guess, acquainted with inner child work, like we're essentially like babushka dolls. So like our that inner child is there forever. And I've found that when I use constructed awareness and the client gets to go back and be the person they needed but did not have when they were a child, big shifts happen. Because it's like, oh wow, that layer of babushka doll is now reinforced because your inner child gets to have you now. Yeah. So it's trippy. People say it's like a psychedelic experience sometimes if you allow it to be, because there's that element of true curiosity and compassion. It's ultimately compassion gets brought into all of these scenarios, and it heals.
I think without an awareness of all parts of yourself, it makes it maybe impossible or really hard to connect with something like your inner child, right? Maybe as that awareness of the different parts, because I think CA is parts work. It's just parts of the experience, not like different personalities. That's kind of, but I always say it is parts work technically. But as somebody learns to expand their awareness of all parts of themselves, then parts of themselves begin to show up in ways that they hadn't experienced before. So yeah, I think that's like the big way that I use CA to work with chronic pain. So it's interesting. Like somebody will come with chronic pain, and it doesn't really look like pain work. It's like we're just bringing awareness to their experience, not just the pain, but all the parts, all the building blocks, right? And then just seems like oftentimes the symptoms begin to shift.
They do. It's like, it's inevitable. It's interesting because people find me for chronic pain and chronic illness because they think they're coming to me to just radically accept the fact that they're going to have this for the rest of their life.
Right.
And please just give me the tools and resources to just move forward with this in my life. And yes, there is an element of radical acceptance happening at this very moment. And we are inviting in radical hope and neuroscience, because there's science. This is based in science. This isn't woo woo. Like, I don't have a little wand saying I'm gonna remove the pain from your body, but that there's this. I know that'd be pretty good. Probably making a lot more money. No, just kidding. Selling that someplace. But we're also creating room and space for hope that things can shift and can change, because nothing changes if nothing changes, and we are inviting these modalities that inevitably shift and change. That makes sense. And as folks begin to do this, and I've shared with Tyler, like, I've had clients successfully completely get off pain medications. They also get to use this in their own day to day. Like, I had a client that was like, Christina, all of a sudden I woke up with terrible neck pain. I thought about, well, maybe I slept on this incorrectly. And she was like, that's old news. Right away, she thought about, what was a pain in my neck these last couple of days? And she figured out it was work related, and it was this specific thing. And as soon as she named it, the pain shifted. It just shifted. So that is something that does happen. And
the pain shifting, that's an interesting thing. We call it whack-a-mole. So like, if you have pain that jumps from here and all of a sudden it's over there, it's just like moves all around the body. That's a good sign. That doesn't really make sense structurally. It's like, okay, did your bulge disc just unbulge when it went into your carpal tunnel in your wrist? And we see that all the time, right? You see that working. It's like, it's almost like once the client isn't believing in that anymore, like they recognize, okay, that's, my neck is fine or whatever. This is something going on. This is the result of my nervous system being overwhelmed. What'll happen is the pain will move somewhere else, and all of a sudden they'll start like taking care of that and like coddling that and like shifting all their attention to that. One thing that Sarno talked about is like, it's almost easier it's more acceptable to focus on physical pain than emotional pain. So it's a smoke and mirrors thing where it's almost like, look over here, don't look over here at this emotional stuff. And it's like culturally more acceptable to seek treatment for physical pain than it is for emotional pain.
That's why we've evolved to almost prefer it and to point at it immediately rather than like, maybe this is rooted in something a little bit deeper than this.
If you have a coworker who has chronic back pain, debilitating back pain, and another one who has debilitating depression, who are you more likely to ask, how are you doing? Right? So it's like, it's easier for us to fixate on physical pain than emotional pain. So a lot of times the physical pain is a neurological response to kind of keep our attention focused on this pain instead of like the deeper pain. And that's a good point. It's a good way to kind of wrap up. Another important aspect that I've learned about working with chronic pain is oftentimes chronic pain is the result of something deeper. It's like the pain is a symptom of something deeper, just like a fever is the result of like a virus or something, some sort of infection. And so, but if you go to the doctor wouldn't diagnose you with a fever, right? They would look deeper, but they don't do that with chronic pain. They'll say, oh, you have back pain? Well, your diagnosis is back pain. And they'll look at an MRI and say, well, right there, or X-ray, and they'll say, well, you got some tissue degeneration right there. That's where your pain is. They'll point right at it and say, it's right there. That's where your pain is. But there is no imaging. We have no technology to like image or see pain. You know what our most sophisticated system for pain is? Rate your pain 0 to 10. Like imaging can show tissue damage, but we've talked about earlier that tissue damage doesn't equal pain. You can have tissue damage and no pain.
And inflammation, the same.
Inflammation, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing that can really measure inflammation, right? Am I wrong about that?
No. At this point, no. I mean, there are certain can get lab work done that will indicate inflammation in the body, but and then of course if you see like redness on the surface and so forth, but
it might not hurt.
Yeah, no,
So
no, no.
you can have inflammation.
I've had it. I know that I've gotten cuts and scrapes on myself, and I don't even know when that happened. I don't even remember feeling that. How, what is that about exactly?
It was like a party accident. Yeah,
yeah, totally. I wish I had that excuse. I'm just a klutz sometimes.
Klutz, right?
But I had I was getting an infusion maybe like a year ago, and I remember this nurse telling us, we're talking about the mind-body connection, and this nurse told us a story about this husband and wife, and the wife had an open wound, so they were doing wound care for we're talking years. Like the wound would not shut, and the husband also had like some kind of chronic illness. They were an elderly couple. He passed away, and within 2 weeks, her wound shut completely.
Yeah.
Because their relationship, whatever. I mean, won't get into like specifics, but it was weighing on her so heavily. So there is just a mind body connection that we can't deny.
And when we're talking about like pain, it's in your brain. It's like, well, there's still a biological component. Yeah. We're not dismissing that. You can think about something embarrassing and you'll blush. That's a biological. There's a shift in blood flow. Mm-hmm. Sarno, I think, even talked about. He thought that like low back pain was a result of like blood vessels constricting in response to this repressed rage. So it's like there is an element. We're not dismissing that. I want to make sure. Yeah. And did you say earlier that pain? There's no such thing as like false pain.
Did I say there's no such thing as false pain?
Yeah, it's like people say like, oh, that's not real pain. That's all in your head.
Oh, well, doctors who say that. I mean, I've been told that so many times, like to go take a bath or put on some nice music or do yoga or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they'll treat it like, oh, well, that's not real. That's the psychosomatic.
Yeah.
But all pain's real.
All pain is real.
All pain's real. If even if it doesn't align with the tissue situation, it is real within your subjective experience. I just want to stress that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it is rooted in like a deeper, like an unprocessed experience, like some earlier life experience that wasn't processed properly at the time. And as a result, it's like, imagine your nervous system like a bucket that's almost full of water. What's in, like the water that's in that's like past experiences and current life stressors. So it doesn't take much extra water for that to overflow. And when it overflows, that's when we get symptoms. And that can look like panic attacks, whatever. They can also be chronic pain, irritable bowel, restless leg, you name it, all the stuff that we work with.
Yeah. So, and trauma gets stuck in the body when we don't have someone to process it with. Remember that. Like if we didn't have a healthy person to co-regulate with at that moment, bam, it gets stuck in the body basically until we are ready to process it later on. And like Tyler was saying, like we get, and like we mentioned this, like the 4 F's, we have fight or flight. Why do we get stuck in a chronic dysregulated nervous system situation? Because at some point our body perceived, our brain perceived that, there was like essentially a tiger chasing after us, something traumatic happened. Or maybe it happened multiple times and we just get stuck there. So there's fight or flight, there's freeze response, and there's fawning. And freeze is what we do. We can't physically flee a situation. Often that looks like, we can't make a decision. We're having indecision fatigue. That's what we're suffering from. Or we're procrastinating, or we're just staring at a wall instead of doing something else. And then there's fawning, which is the people-pleasing response, having this tendency to put other people or things in front of ourselves, and so on and so forth. So the goal is to get out of fight or flight so that healing that was on the back burner goes on the front burner. So we're not prioritizing our survival. We're prioritizing our joy and our thrival, essentially. And
I say that too. I
love it. Yeah, survival to thrival. It's like my favorite.
I'm in a thrival state.
I'm in a thrival state today.
And like I think that what's at the root of all chronic pain, it's a bold statement, but I think it's powerlessness. And so whether we're talking about like repressed emotions or we're talking about like an earlier life experience that wasn't processed, it was probably an experience of powerlessness. But Schubner, Gordon, Sarno, they all talk about like there's certain personalities that tend to have chronic pain, and they're always like the givers, the tryhards, the people that put the needs of others, me too, ahead of themselves. It's like my grandmother, said she had rheumatoid arthritis, and it's like there was never a more giving person than her.
Yeah.
And it's like they're the people that hold it all together. They're like in silence, right?
Totally.
It's like
Silent sufferers.
Silent sufferers, yeah.
Yeah.
Usually, like if you decide if you're a therapist who wants to work with chronic pain, it's a delightful client load because they're usually like the doctor. There's a doctor named Matt McClanahan who's taught me a lot about chronic pain, and he always says like the assholes of the world don't have chronic pain because they're able to express their power. They express it all over everybody, but it's the people who, for whatever reason, whatever flavor of powerlessness they have. I think that's what's at the root. And so, yeah, I think with CA, I know we're running out of time. We should do another episode on like just how to process, because that's a whole other area that I want to get to. I know we're running out of time, but like know that constructed awareness has a way of processing past experiences that, in my experience, and I think you'd agree with me, is a lot softer than EMDR.
Definitely.
Yeah, and so CA we have a way of like kind of finding those memories, like getting to the root, the thing that's fueling the symptom, and process it using tuning, like we talked about, where we're shifting back and forth. Has your experience of that been different than EMDR?
Oh, I mean, with EMDR, you're going at like 200 miles per hour into the thing, right? Versus with constructed awareness, I can go as slowly or as quickly as I can, and then I can shift, I can tune out of it into something else and then return back to it. There is no option for that in EMDR except completely just stopping right there and then kind of resourcing, but it's not enough by that point. So it's much more, to me, a lot more calmer to the nervous system. And I just also want to piggyback on what you said. Like also Dr. Gabor Mate talks about the personality types of chronic illness and chronic pain, which is like
when the body says no.
Yeah, fantastic book. And Myth of Normal also goes into it quite a bit. And it's really amazing, this work, because you get to, and I love that you mentioned powerlessness. Like as you're saying it, I'm really thinking about it. I'm like, wow, I resonate from what I've witnessed. But it's amazing as a therapist to see someone get their power back, because really no one can take our power away from us. No one can. And it's remembering that power is still there. And I get to see someone literally claim it for themselves as their own. And I don't know if you can compare a better feeling than that.
Yeah, but I don't think you can claim that from the same perspective you've always had. That's why I think like expanding into those new parts of ourselves.
Totally.
That's where it's at. Like that's the change that happens. It's like you begin to experience yourself differently and a bigger version of you as you connect with parts of yourself that you're disconnected from. And stuff just starts to happen, right?
It's cool. Start to happen.
And it's always better than something I could dream up on a treatment plan or whatever. It's like, because it's coming, the client is sourcing from within in a really beautiful way. But no, if you're listening to this, you're looking for a CA therapist to help you with your pain. CA therapist can help you with the resourcing and helping you learn to bring conscious awareness to the unconscious parts of yourself that could be leading to the pain. But also we have skills that can help, find those things that are at the root and process those memories, those experiences. A lot of good stuff can happen. So how would somebody get a hold of you if they wanted to work with you? Especially because you said you do coaching. So you'll work in any state. Is that right?
Yeah, and internationally.
Cool.
So you can find me at Begin Within Today or beginwithintoday.com.
Cool. We'll make sure and put that in the description. If you want to reach me, my personal website's tylerorr.com. If you're interested, I'm licensed in Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Hopefully Georgia soon. Maybe by the time this is out, that'll be. So I'll have the whole eastern side of the Southeast locked down. So you can reach out to me at tylerorr.com. But if you want to learn more about constructed awareness, please visit constructedawareness.com. We're always running trainings. Need to do one on CA and pain. Soon. I think that's a good idea.
Maybe we do it together, Tyler.
That's right. Well, and so, this was great. I'd like to do another one again, because I think we could go even deeper with this, especially like
for sure
how to process like the memory reconstruction that we do Like you learned in level 2, there's a level 3 coming out for anybody listening that's done levels 1 and 2. I hope you'll be there, Christina.
I hope so.
We're going to focus on a new way of processing called responsive processing that's unstructured. So it's literally just working with what's showing up right in front of you with the client and processing that way. So it's not limited to just memories like we do in level 2. It's just working with like literally what's happening in the moment. So we'd love to share that with you and with anyone else listening. So that's about it, right, for today?
It was good.
Okay.
Thanks to everyone who listened in.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for being here. And we'll catch y'all next time.